keep that passing along. I am Bonneau Dixon. I'm a member of the SPA, Saline Preservation Association Board. We also have here today Michael Ramsey, who I keep wanting to call Reynolds, who's also a board member. There will be 3 more meetings, if you don't know about that. There's one tomorrow, Tuesday night in Ridgecrest, one Wednesday night in Bishop, and then there's a webinar from 5:30 to 7:30 on Thursday. So you can sign in. You need to sign into that 15 minutes early. All of that information is on the SPA Forum website. I think with that, Mr. Reynolds, you're on.
All right, perfect. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. All right.
I think there was a no back here.
Was there a no?
Oh, okay.
Okay, come on up. Nobody here. I'll try to talk loud. First, I want to thank everybody for coming. One of the things that's most exciting about getting to work on with you guys on this project is the amount of passion associated with Saline Valley in particular, and certainly Death Valley. And I'm very excited to get to talk with you guys about that today, because the only thing worse than having a meeting about a place in a national park that you're passionate about is when nobody comes and nobody cares. And that, seriously, like, that would be the travesty, is if nobody cared about a place enough to come and talk about it. So the fact that you're here just makes my heart sing. So thank you for coming to talk with us. And if you were here to have a good weekend and you got interrupted by a bunch of government people talking to you, I'm sorry for that too. But I'm looking forward to the next bit of time. I want to thank Bonneau and Mike Ramsey from SPA for helping us get this set up, as well as Dave and Lizard Lee, who were helping with some of the logistics getting this set up to come out here today. My name is Mike Reynolds. I'm the superintendent here at Death Valley National Park. I've been in that role for about 3 years. But I actually first moved here 18 years ago when I fell in love with Death Valley. Made the mistake of leaving for a decade and realized that this is where it's at. So finally came back home a few years ago. So I'm honored and humbled to be able to work with Death Valley National Park now, and looking forward to talking about this. I also have a great team with me here today. It looks like a lot of people, and it is. One of the things we wanted to do was to make sure we had all of the experts, and I actually, you'll find out that superintendents really don't know anything, but they're surrounded by people who are experts in a variety of things. So I wanted to make sure that all of your questions, especially while we're here at Saline Valley today, we could answer those. So I want the park team to go introduce themselves and mention their expertise, and so you can target that. If you have something you're particularly interested in, you'll know who to ask after the meeting is over.
Hello, Josh Hoynes. I am the Chief of Resources for the park. That means I oversee all the natural cultural resource specialists. So if you have a question, please come see me.
I'm Jessica Hearns. I'm an admin assistant for the park, and I'm also a mathematical ecologist.
I'm Kara McKinley-Jones. I'm the Chief Ranger, and I oversee the law enforcement function, the emergency services function, as well as the fee operation.
I'm Nicole Bernard. I am also law enforcement and backcountry. That's my specialty, I guess.
She's probably the face you guys see out here the most, for those of you that come. So.
I'm Kelly Daigle. I'm from Denver, so I don't work at the park, but thank you for having me out here. This is my first time here, and it's amazing. I'm the project manager for the NEPA document, so if you have any questions about the document itself or the NEPA process or public comments, please come find me.
NEPA stands for?
Excuse me, thanks. The National Environmental Policy Act.
Huh. Which is?
So when we undertake planning efforts in the federal government, we are required by that law to complete either an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. In this case, it's this environmental impact statement that's allowing us to do the planning for then on-the-ground implementation of anything.
Interesting.
Hi, my name is Abby Wines, and what I'm most an expert in doesn't relate to this. That's Scotty's Castle. For 10 years, I've supervised the tours at Scotty's Castle, and then my job literally washed away. So if you have any questions about the flood recovery, that's part of my new job, is coordinating the engineers and finding the money to get that place back open. Another part of my new job is partnerships and public information officer, which means my role to help get the word out to interested people about things like this.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Chipman, and I
do a number of things for the park under the umbrella of public affairs, and I've been with this planning effort, I want to say the longest of all the staff in the park, so I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to see people that I met 5 years ago at these same type of public meetings, and just want to welcome you and thank you for coming.
And I'm Patrick Taylor, Chief of Interpretation. That's primarily the Visitor Center, the Ranger-led programs, and the education outreach. I came to Death Valley about 10 years ago, left for only 5 years, so I guess I'm a little quicker than Mike to figure things out. And just came back recently also, but very excited to be out here today.
All right. Thanks. I think that's everybody. And so, so just to give you a quick look at the agenda for the next bit of time here, the primary purpose for us being here today is to hear from you and to answer questions you might have. So those two things: answer questions, hear from you. And so I decided the most effective way for that is for me to blab at you for the next 20 minutes. I'm just kidding, but actually I'm not, because because if you look at a lot of the comments we've received so far, and a lot of the comments on the Facebook page and different places, there's definitely a lot of misinformation about what is or isn't going to happen and sort of where we are with the process, which I chalk up to there's so much passion for how to protect this place and keep it special that people can overreact to some of the things that they think they hear or they do hear. So I want to make sure we go through and talk about where we are and what we have said, and then answer your questions about that so that it will help you focus your comments more effectively. So, you guys have all heard of the National Park Service. Have you ever been to a national park? I hope you say yes, because you're sitting in one right now. You've probably heard of other national parks. So the National Park Service is an agency, part of the Department of the Interior and the federal government. And they were asked, there are 417 National Park Service units that were established either by the President or by Congress, that were set up and preserved to be protected forever, so for future generations to be able to enjoy. And these 417 places, how are they identified as places that are so special to be nationally significant? So either a natural area like Death Valley that says, oh my gosh, this is so special, this has to be preserved forever, or there is sites of historic significance to the United States, whether that's a battlefield or a president's home or whatever. So those are actually 417 isn't very many when you think about the entire history of the country and places that are special. In my opinion, Death Valley is the most special, but I'm a little bit biased. Some of the things that you've seen here, if you've been here for a while, you may not have known, Death Valley National Park is 3.4 million acres, which makes it the largest national park outside of the state of Alaska. So it's a huge place. 1,100 acres of it are Saline Valley Warm Springs, but the park itself actually spans a huge, vast area. Some other things that most everybody could tell you about Death Valley: hottest place on Earth. So temperature of 134 degrees measured in 1913. Was the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth at Furnace Creek. The lowest elevation in North America at 282 feet below sea level near Badwater. Driest, 1.9 inches of rain. So some really special, obvious things. But then if you go a little bit beneath the surface, and anybody who's at Saline Valley probably is less interested in going to the hottest place on Earth than to finding somewhere special about Death Valley. But there are places like the racetrack with the mysterious moving rocks. You have Ubi-Hibi Crater, which erupted only 1,100 years ago, which technically makes it an active volcano, although people volcanologists would argue with me. You have Telescope Peak, over 11,000 feet, with some of the oldest trees on the planet, just a few miles that way from here, looking down 11,000 feet to below sea level. There's no place else on Earth that has that difference in that short a period of distance. Eureka Dunes, just around the corner here. There's species growing in the Eureka Dunes that grow nowhere else on Earth outside of that dune system. So there's plant species there that are so special that are just specialized to that valley. Scotty's Castle, which Abby mentioned earlier, it helps pull the story of mining and conmen and its own unique story right here in Death Valley. It takes place in another part of Death Valley. And then, of course, the Saline Valley Warm Springs, right here is a really special place that's unique to here. So when you think about the mining history of Death Valley, there's over 17,000 abandoned mining features found within Death Valley, which is more than the entire rest of the national park system combined. So this is thinking about some things that are unique to here. What is it that you see fly over you really fast, not really slow, but really fast, periodically is the military testing. So Saline Valley, Eureka Valley, Panamint Valley are part of our national defense system. No other national park has a feature where you can see high-speed planes training for missions overseas. And that, if they weren't here, this would not be a national park. They're part of the deal in 1994 that helped this become a park. Otherwise, it would have remained BLM. So some of those things that could be seen as questionable also are features that only Death Valley has. This park also has the Timbisha-Shoshone village at Furnace Creek. It's the only national park with an Indian village entirely contained within its boundaries. And the Timbisha-Shoshone, the ethnography goes back generations and generations of using this land, and it's closely tied with how this land became what it is. And working with the Park Service and the Timbisha has been pretty special. There's 3 airstrips within the park. You know about the chicken strip, and then Furnace Creek and Stovepipe Wells. Most national parks don't have airstrips. So anyway, I could go on and on and on. I'm sure you know lots of special places in Death Valley, but I think what the point I wanted to make was Death Valley is particularly special. It has places that you can't find anywhere else on Earth. And if you go back to what the Park Service's mission was when I started talking about this, is it's our job to identify the natural and cultural features that you find in a national park and make sure that they're available for everybody to enjoy for generations to come. So that means if a place is special now, we're all going to be dead in the next 100 years unless science changes. But the idea would be that whoever comes next should be able to enjoy that in a similar way that we get to now. And in my opinion, that's a pretty cool mission. Not always easy, but that's what we're tasked with doing. So one of the things about that, you probably heard me mention the word everyone. So everyone, if you've been to Death Valley over the last 20 years, we now have 1.3 million visitors coming to Death Valley every year. 16, we had the Super Bloom. That was fantastic. How many got to see the Super Bloom? Most of you. Pretty awesome. Brought a lot of new visitors that hadn't been to Death Valley before. Set an all-time visitation record. 2017, we tied that record even without a Super Bloom. So that means up and up and up. And I believe that you've seen similar visitation patterns, not 1.3 million, thankfully, out here at Saline Valley, but you've seen more and more people coming to experience the site. And what you've seen, if you've been to Joshua Tree or Zion or some of the other national parks that are the canaries in the cage for getting overrun with increased visitation, is if you as an agency don't prepare yourself for how people will enjoy that, you'll lose control of it and the experience becomes awful. So if you went to Joshua Tree this spring or at Christmas, you waited 4 hours to get in a gate and you may have never gotten in at all. And that's a pretty crappy experience versus if you get a reservation or if you pay a higher fee or if you come in the middle of the night or I don't know, like something that lets you at least enjoy it in some way. So part of what the Park Service has to do is anticipate where those increases are going to take place and try to be prepared so that people can still have a reasonable experience before you get behind and something gets overrun. So a little bit of a side hole there, but so how did Death Valley come to be? 1933, by presidential proclamation, became a national monument. 1994, Desert Protection Act was changed from a national monument to a national park. And at that time, over 1 million acres was transferred from the Bureau of Land Management to Death Valley National Park, and that's when Saline Valley transferred from BLM to the Park Service. And then when you get new lands, one of the things the Park Service is tasked with doing is planning. So what are you going to do with that? 2002, the Park Service wrote a general management plan, which is sort of an overall plan about what to do in the park. But guess what they said about Saline Valley? No, very little. They said, "Oh my gosh, that crazy place. What are you going to do with there's all those people out there and they're doing stuff and they're not wearing clothes and there's pools and oh my gosh, we'll punt that down the road. We'll deal with that later." So, okay, sounds great. 10 years later, we wrote the Backcountry Wilderness Management Plan, which addressed all the non-developed areas in the park. And it's a really good plan. If you hopefully you got to participate in that or read that, but it talks about how we're going to handle the roads and some of the backcountry camping and the wilderness areas. And guess what that said about Saline Valley Warm Springs?
Is this considered non-developed?
This is considered Saline Valley Warm Springs.
You mentioned non-developed. Is this considered non-developed?
It's not covered in the wilderness or backcountry plan as developed or non-developed. It's a little 1,100 acre circle, but they said, oh my gosh, that's too hard. It's so complex, we'll just do our own plan for that. Punt it down the road.
We'll let Mike handle it.
Sort of like Lake Wobegon.
Right, Lake Wobegon. So this is our Lake Wobegon. So actually, it's great because it allows us to really focus. I mean, when you're trying to do a park-wide plan, you're talking about Butte Valley and Eureka Valley and all these other places. We can focus only on this and try to get a path forward. Meanwhile, it's been 24 years since this was added to the park, and nothing much has changed. So that's now been a while. So. Anyway, that's sort of where we are. With this plan specifically, 2012, 2014, the Park Service went out to the public, including hopefully a lot of you, and said, all right, as we're getting ready to start writing down a plan, which we're obligated to do for this area, what is it you would want to see? And there were tons and tons of people that came to public meetings, and I wasn't at those meetings. Cheryl has talked a lot about them. I've talked to a lot of you that went, got lots of input. I can tell you the message that was absolutely loud and clear is there's a ton of passion about this place. People love this. It's very special to them in their lives. And there's a strong sentiment about leaving it the same, keeping it how it is, being able to experience it for generations to come. They want to experience the same thing. And if you'll notice, there's a huge parallel between the sentiment with what people want at Saline Valley and what the National Park Service's mission is, which is to keep things intact so that people can continue to enjoy them. So I point that out because I think understanding where people are coming from is probably pretty helpful when you're talking about this stuff. Anyway, let's see. So, oh yeah, this is one thing I thought was pretty brilliant, and one of the reasons that it took. Why has it taken 4 years to come back and talk with you again? Is when you say, when you take the theme of keep it the same, and you have a theme of also other interests that want to use the site, that's not necessarily easy to do when some of the uses that are here are non-traditional uses for a national park. So if you put down in a plan and say, here's all these non-traditional uses that would not otherwise be okay, and expect the bosses up the food chain to say, oh, that's great. You kind of have to have justification beyond, well, the people really want that. There has to be some natural and ecological reason why, or historically significant reason, or ethnographic reason for why that's going to work. So what the Park Service did over the last 4 years is write 2 documents. One's called a Determination of Eligibility, or a DOE, for the National Historic Preservation Act, which looks at the historic ethnography of the site and the traditional uses. So that's the Tinvisha Shoshone and the affiliated tribes and how they've used this area traditionally, and also looking at the archaeology of the site. And then also in parallel with that was done a DOE, this is the part that I think was pretty creative, is a DOE on the historic nature of the site itself. So if you look at this site as a historic site, meaning there are features, this goes all the way back to the 1930s when people started digging out pits and the miners were silver here. Certainly through the 50s and 60s, the counterculture movement, if you want to call it that, and then all the way through to today where it's a popular place for people to come and inspire with nature and connect with the place. A lot of these things have been exactly as they have been for 50 years or more, which actually, if you look at it as a historic site, that allows the Park Service as part of our mission to protect that as a historic site, like Scotty's Castle or something else that's historic. So if you can identify which features to contribute to it, such as the pools, it then makes it our mission to actually keep them in the condition they are now. So I think that was a way that lets us then write into a plan that says these features are important in that way. Some other things that the plan does not address, or that we did find a way forward, I actually illegal. In fact, there's no federal law that prohibits nudity, and it's not enforced unless you're committing a lewd act, which is in the eye of the victim. So there's that. There is a county ordinance, Inyo County ordinance, that prohibits nudity. However, U.S. Park Rangers do not have the authority. We're not cross-deputized to enforce county regulations. So the plan is silent on nudity, and it continues. When you do that, you're violating a county ordinance, and that's not covered in this plan because it's not a federal crime. The soaking pools I mentioned as part of the historic DOE are now protected. I can't remember, I think there's about 20 that were identified as part of the historic site. The historic art, and so some of the historic art, the large peace signs, the bat pole, are identified as contributing features to the historic district, so those become protected, meaning they need to be left intact as they are. One of the challenges, however, with a lot of the art, like the snake and the bat and some of the other ones that are made of rock, is if you go back, pre-white settlement, all of the most springs are surrounded by archaeological sites because they were, as the desert works, people are attracted to water. So it's actually illegal to disturb an archaeological site if it's intact. And anytime you're disturbing dirt or rocks, that's generally what's happening if you're near a spring. And so the art is a little bit of conflict with the law that already exists. And so that's why we were putting in the plan about not creating new art and not disturbing the rocks that are in this area, but allowing the historic art to continue to exist. The chicken strip, which is the airstrip over here, that is, interestingly, we discovered in the process, by definition, and Abby can explain this way better, so probably talk about it if you want more detail, but you have to have a rule that allows an airstrip to exist if you're in a national park. And without that rule, the airstrip cannot exist. Chicken strip has no rule, so we've initiated a rule-making process that about, in parallel with this, will allow the chicken strip to legally exist. In the meanwhile, it will be continued to be left open. Similarly, with camping at the chicken strip, which was a big question, what we heard was people want to camp with their planes, even though there's no bathroom there, and it's a long way to the bathroom over here. That's also continued in the plan because that's something that people were interested in. A lot of comments I saw about roads and access. So roads are not covered in this plan. Access is not covered in this plan. That's backcountry plan, and there's no plans to change what's here now. Inyo County manages the north and south pass surface part of the road, and Park Service, for what it's worth, manages Steel Pass, which if you look in the backcountry plan is not managed. It's user maintained. And so that's what's currently happening, and that's not changing. And in fact, anything outside of the 1,100-acre district is not covered in the plan. It's very much focused on.
Will the Bat Road be continued as user maintained?
It is continued. It's not addressed in the plan. So we're continuing to do whatever's being done right now, which is probably dragging the tires back and forth. And what would change under all the alternatives? So here's some other things that have come up in comments that are common themes within the park. So for example, the removal of invasive species is something that all national parks are shooting to do. You want to have intact ecosystems so that they can be as healthy as possible. Burros are an invasive species. So unrelated to this plan directly is the removal of the invasive burros. We have a new agreement we're working on, and the park has been for decades periodically rounding up and relocating burros outside of the park. So that is continuing. Invasive species, so non-historic palm trees, which we remove throughout the park. In this case, we're working on removing, the plan calls for removal of all the palm trees at the upper spring. I want to make sure when we're talking springs, we have this spring, Palm Spring, and Upper Spring. Does everybody use the same language for that? No. What do you call the upper 4 mile away spring?
Burrow Spring or Upper Spring.
Upper Spring. Yeah, the one with the big weird chain link fence.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's Upper Spring or Burrow Spring. So that
that's the Burrow. Burrow Spring's out.
Burrow Spring's out. So I'm talking about the Upper Spring that's 4 miles.
That's the Upper Spring.
So the plan calls for basically cleaning that plate, all the palms out of there, making it as native as possible. And then that natural restoration also provides ethnographic uses for the Tavisha Shoshone tribe, and this is for which this is a very sacred, special place, and they'll be able to use that spring as it's restored naturally. Let's see. Bermuda grass is a nasty invasive grass, and so trying to, if you've ever tried to remove Bermuda grass, it's very difficult. But
Good.
replacing invasive grass with native grass so that it's not so expansive. One of the problems with Bermuda grass is when it gets transferred to other springs, it can take over and harm other springs. So one of the ideas is hopefully to replace the grass with natives. Park entrance fee has come up. So anytime you're in the park using the fee, there's an entrance fee. That hasn't changed under any plan or under this plan. Dirty discharge water. So if you have a shower or a dishwashing area, the county has requirements for how that discharge water gets re-put back into the system. And my understanding is that this doesn't currently meet that. So we have to bring this into compliance with that. And then protecting water sources that are used for domestic use, whether it's treated or not, have to be protected from contamination, specifically burrows. So some of the changes are surrounding like how to protect the water sources from burrow feces before you can drink or whatever you're doing with burrow feces. What would change under this, and I'm almost done, I promise, the burrow exclusion fence. So I know there's been a lot of interest in the fence. The intent with the fence was to have it be minimally intrusive so that the visual impact of the fence was as little as possible, so you don't see it. But you also need to exclude the burrows from the water sources that are here. And so the intent was minimal visual intrusion and burrow exclusion. So if you can come up with an idea that accomplishes those goals in another way, that would be fantastic. We're looking for comments on that. The auto shop infrastructure. So there are some hazardous material storage and cleanup issues associated with that, which is short term, but there's also the fact that, Lizard Lee, who lives here, Dave, of our National Park Service, Death Valley volunteers, and they help people work on their vehicles. However, all of that equipment belongs personally to Lizard Lee. When he retires, his stuff goes away, the compound goes away, Lee goes away. The odds of finding a year-round professional mechanic that's going to live out here and work on your cars for free is pretty close to zero. The plan calls for removal of that, cleaning up the hazmat thing, and then transitioning when Lee goes, that the auto shop will get cleaned up. Also focusing, one of the tenets of recreating in Death Valley is independence and self-reliance. And so it's also important that when people go into the backcountry at Death Valley, they're prepared for such a trip and they're self-reliant and able to experience that safely on their own, and they plan ahead and don't plan to find an auto shop at various places in the backcountry. So that calls for that. Campsite delineation and registration. So with the increased usage, an attempt to have some organization about campsites closer to the springs with free camping places farther out. No cost, just more organization so that people can know that they'll be able to get a site when they come here. Restoration of the upper spring we talked about. Increasing the size of the restroom at Palm Spring, I believe, is in there. And that's it. I think a lot of you guys have read the plan, but just to reiterate, what we're here today trying to do is hear from you and answer your questions, seeking feedback from you. I'll tell you that the tenets of the plan, and I wasn't here for the first round of public meetings, but I was here for the last 3 years as we worked through meeting after meeting. We read your comments again and again and again to try to make sure that this balances all of the different interests and uses so that we have a plan that largely keeps this place intact and as it is now going forward. And another thing, as far as being able to submit comments, you can do that through July 2nd. One of the reasons we made the comment period full 60 days, which is extra long, twice as long as it needs to be, so that we would be sure that everybody has time from May to read the comments, ask questions, attend one of the meetings, get all of their questions answered, and then be able to make and submit thoughtful comments online. So you have through July 2nd for that, and Phil's going to talk about how to do that. And also specifically just for today, we wanted to come here this weekend to Saline Valley first. That was really important to us at the park.
acres that, my first trip in here was a Boy Scout hike in 1969. My first 3 trips were that. And I fell in love with it then. And I've been coming back ever since. And the community of this, the people who love and take care of this place, have always been. And that's what makes this unique, and that's why it makes your guys' job easy.
That's fantastic.
Makes our job what?
Easier. Yep.
And you can see that in the bathrooms. I've been in a lot of national forest parks, and I haven't seen such a clean bathrooms like these ones. So that can tell you a lot.
Amen.
And I think we recognize that, and that's why some of our preferred alternative is to continue to work with the community to help us manage as we have for the past 30 years. We realize our capacity is limited, and that it's extraordinary that a group of people would actually step up to the plate and help manage a place in a peaceful relationship with a bureaucracy. So we do appreciate that, and we hope that that will continue.
I'd like to recognize my appreciation for the Park Service for letting we, the people here, manage this site and sustain this site and steward it with such minimal oversight. And hopefully, we've proved that we're good stewards here. And you guys have very little problem with, and nearly no expense. And I would caution the Park Service to create a bunch of regulation that they cannot enforce. And so that should be, an element of that is what can you actually say, well, you don't have a reserved campsite, so hit the road. It's
So,
so
sorry to interrupt.
so be cautious of your regulation and what you have the financially able to.
So I'd like, as a community here, we want to make sure we've got some time for questions and answers. But to your point, one of the most important parts of this process coming out to you guys is getting your feedback in writing. So anything we hear today, we're taking it in, we're hearing it, but for it to be formally submitted under this process, you need to either do it online, and we have that web address we can give you. We also brought a bunch of comment cards. So you can take those with you, if you're hanging out today or through July 2nd. Please write down detailed comments for us, because we do read every single one of those comments, and we will respond to those that are substantive. So rather than telling us, we hate the preferred alternative, we want no action, please be specific. Tell us about those parts and pieces of this place that you would like to see changed or remain the same. Really be thoughtful in your responses, because we read every single one of those, and we use those then to produce a final document that hopefully addresses a lot of your concerns and comments that we'll hear today. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. We'd love to hear your comments, and please do that in writing. I also, you guys are a community, and we normally just kind of do informal Q&A. We'll be around, but I think you guys probably all have a lot of the same questions, so maybe I'd like to just give folks an opportunity to ask Mike or any one of us a question. You're welcome to share those comments as well, but please know those comments need to be written down for us to really take them in. Great. So if anybody has a question, we can kind of do an open Q&A, and then we'll spend some time after this as well, just walking around and talking with you guys individually. So if you're not comfortable speaking in front of the group, can talk to us afterwards.
How much deferred maintenance does this particular national park have? And then how about deferred maintenance for all of the other 600 and something sites like Valley Forge and whatever? Why would you want to add more new stuff as a line item on a budget you have to justify? And Scotty's Castle's been closed for 3 years?
2.5, yeah.
Keen Wonder Mine. I could have visited that thing 100 times when I lived in Haiti, and I still haven't done it.
It's open now.
Reopened in November. Yep. Yeah, that definitely deferred maintenance is a huge issue, for sure. I mean, it's costly, but there's a reason for it too. You want people when they come to enjoy a place be able to enjoy a place that's not falling apart, that's prepared for them to visit, that has space for them to camp, that has water that they can drink that's not soiled, et cetera, bathrooms for them to use, places to get help when they need help, those sort of things. So, deferred maintenance is definitely a problem, but it's certainly visitor friendly.
We got lots of places that are falling apart.
Yep.
We would like to have something still there at the end of the trail. You know, there's lots of mining camps, lots of cabins around the area, like Mangle Pass. There's a lot of principal cabins there, and they're getting close to being uninhabitable.
Yeah.
Like Nelson.
Yeah, Nelson Cabin. You guys know where the Nelson Cabin is over by the Bonnie Lee. There was some work done on that. It doesn't take a whole lot to get some of these places put into good condition.
What's the actual detriment to the home to the site? Why would you want to do
With these fan palms, these are Washingtonia philurithras, I'm pretty sure looking at them. They're native to southern California, just down around the San Andreas Fault, in about dozens or so springs down there. They've been moved by people primarily in California to the missions, so they've been put all over California, but they don't stay put. They probably live 60 years or so. Most of these, by historic photos and things, were planted in the 80s, near as we can tell. So they'll be here for a long time, but the seeds do spread, and they're spread by coyotes, by birds, and then you'll find them in remote sites, and then they start to take over, and it's two things. And they grow really crowded like this. There's no sort of population growth to them in and of themselves. If you go visit any of the native springs, like Palm Springs area, they just own the whole place. And then these skirts on them are highly flammable. It's actually part of their ecology. These things, if you ever see them hit by lightning or if you ever see them go up in flame, they explode. And it will burn everything around them. But it's really on the invasive side of it in the native ecology, because if birds are eating these, they're not spreading the mesquites. They're not spreading other seeds. If coyotes are spreading them, they go long distances, and you'll start to see palms show up on the plate. Around the park, we see palms pretty much pan park, except at the higher elevations, because they don't do well with the cold weather. And over the years, we have started to eradicate them. Sometimes it's opportunistically, sometimes it's purposefully. The Travertine Spring, if you're over in the Furnace Creek system, about a decade ago, Navarre's Spring most recently, and we are starting to remove some up at Scotty's Castle. Some places where they're considered historic, like Mike was talking about with the artwork here, there are a few of these that show up on the historic photos, so some of them would be considered critical elements for that historic aspect of this area. And those we would try to manage as such. I don't know if that answers your question.
I've been to a lot of water courses around the valley here, and there are no palms out there because we have frosts in the winter that kill this walking path. And so it's not actually invasive presently, except where the warmth in the spring is keeping that frost control. So as far as their invasion, there are no palms in Seven Sisters, there are no palms in Hunter Canyon or Beveridge or Jack Keys. You know, so I would make the measure that here in this particular environment, they're not invasive. But they are very prolific, and I'd probably kill 1,000.
They're extremely
So, you know, maybe they have to be kept back.
Because I don't see any coming in and out of here. I don't see them. Where are they spreading to?
Some of which I don't know. You know, the state ecological preserve right here in the valley floor. We do have some loose relationships with them, but we're not really sure what they do and don't do. There was a big eradication about a year ago. Both BLM Park Service and on the state properties down here. If they were finding palms, they probably figured at the same time. But the answer was I don't have information on that. My third
what changes you guys are proposing to our irrigation system that's going to change what we experience today, so that our future generations can experience the same thing?
Is that a question about the irrigation system?
Yeah. Are you changing how we water the lawn, the ponds, and things like that? Because if a palm tree does get planted a mile down the road, the only reason it's sustained is because we have a water irrigation system here. Out there, there's nothing. It's going to die. It's not going to be flourish.
I'll be honest with you right now, off the top of my head, I don't recall what we put in the plan for irrigation. What is here is essentially what's still there. This in the fenced area, the lawn doesn't change. Outside of here, we talked about reducing irrigation outside of the fenced area. And, if a palm started a mile down the road,
You're talking about taking out the cold source that comes from there to water the lawn,
I don't actually recall what's in there, but certainly if it's in there, comment on it and help us fix that.
The dog pool, that's safe as a registered spring, a registered source before here.
Yeah, just to clarify, and it might not help, but so under NEPA, we're really just looking at those actions that have environmental impacts, and some of these do, but I think a lot of what the public comments I've been seeing are that we didn't go into enough detail, we didn't provide you guys with enough of the specifics to be able to react to it, and unfortunately under NEPA, we're looking at a variety of things, but we're not actually sometimes getting down into those implementation level details. So that is where your public comments, while they may not show up in the NEPA document, will help the park as they move to implement some of these actions once the plan is done.
I would like to invite the Park Service to look at the drainage from both of the dishwashing stations. There's talk about a filter, which I presume you'll pay for, and who's going to change it? That's going to cause more problems than it solves.
Stinky too.
This ditch here is close to what's called in sanitary engineering an overland flow wastewater treatment system. Almost, you go look today, the water from the springs from the dishwashing sink does not reach the pond. Also notice on the pond there is no grease sheen on it at all. The pond's not affected. I believe that the irrigation system drains out through the fence and not to the pond. And I believe that's incorrect in the management report. Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not. Thanks. That's a great comment.
It hasn't come to you in writing. We assure you that.
I just wanted to comment one more time on the trees, and I think that in the next 3 meetings, that's probably going to be another concern of people, because it's something that I think the users care a lot about here is the shade they provide. And even if you do replant this area and whether shade bearing trees like mesquite or something, it's not going to provide the same level of comfort and shade. And before assuming that they're invasive, I'm going to start to the area, maybe
So are there other types of trees that provide shade that might be less invasive? I mean, understanding the invasive thing, but forget that for the moment. I guess my question for the group would be, are there other alternatives? Is it palms and nothing else, or is there something like mesquite or tamarisk or something that's not as aggressive?
Well, I'm
asking you.
I think if there was something else that provides
But in your point of view, does it have to be a native tree? I mean, there's a lot of shade trees out there.
So I would say there's 3 different levels of things. There's aggressive invasives, which unfortunately palms are. They may, depends on the type, you can work around the edges of it, but we have springs throughout the park that are totally decimated that went from 1 palm to hundreds. Forgetting that for the moment, you have aggressive invasives, you have non-invading non-natives. So if you plant one, it stays there, and it only stays there. So that's essentially the argument that you're making for palms. And then you have natives. And so on a scale of 1 to 3, natives are better in a national park, but non-invading non-natives would be the next best. And then aggressive invaders, you have to hope that they don't destroy the park. That's it's not complicated. That's the values. And so
is there a way to change the palm trees seriously, if it's just a matter of like paperwork, is it can we change
because of conditions, I guess, is that what you're saying? You can manage them aggressively, right? So, right. So if you're, that would be an excellent comment, because that would be sort of a novel idea. So Josh and his team, we spend tens of thousands of dollars throughout the year. We have a team who goes around the park to remove invasives to try to restore springs so that they're healthy. And palms are one of the main things that, I mean, I don't know what that contract was for the hundreds of thousands of dollars just to remove palms. And then you have bulldozers and they're ripping up springs, and that's horrible. And the cultural, anyway, I won't dwell on that, but I guess the point is, if one of the goals, as Cheryl mentioned in the plan, is to work with the community. And so if we could identify a mutual goal of not having the palms expand, and any, I'm sure we could say any palm bigger than this or whatever it looks like, it's enemy number one.
Maybe that could be
that could be part of what SPA signs up to have the users do, and then Ramsey can sit out there.
Gladly. Yeah, we'll do that.
I have a question for you.
I got a new business.
Josh, does it make sense then for the palms that are here now to remove the dead from?
We do.
For fire. Yeah, we're seeing a couple now. Does it make sense though to maintain that, or is there a reason for keeping them on or not keeping them on?
Two things. One, it should be mentioned that the preferred alternative that we have, the trees that are here right now, don't go away until they die of natural causes. And over that lifetime, which these probably have, everything that's here, you're looking at somewhere between 40 and 50 years, probably for most of them. 30 for some of the taller, more decadent looking ones. And that's just a ballpark figure, but my guess is about 60 years, and they get continuous water here, so it may even be longer. Nobody really knows how long a palm tree lives in Saline Valley.
But what about my great-great-grandchildren?
The idea there is that
because you're preserving this or the idea. I'm sorry.
So for your great-great-grandchildren, what is proposed is that as these start to fane out, that we would replace them, hopefully, with some native species.
They'll come up with a hybrid.
Excuse me?
They'll come up with a hybrid.
They might.
It's not going to spread.
And that may be an alternative for us to look at as we move forward. But that's just in the proposed alternative. Again, we're here seeking all of your comments and hope that you guys will help us make appropriate decisions for this site.
How about like an oak tree and or tea tree? Those two, they can take this type of weather, but I don't know if that's going to work for you.
I heard oak. I don't know the other one, but I'm happy to discuss them at any time.
The tea trees are amazing. Are very, very, very beautiful.
In this site, what we have from historic photos was not much in here, because it's such a remote site. But probably in this whole basin, you could find things like ash trees, cottonwoods, willows. These arrowweeds grow prolifically here, but if you're looking for vertical structure, it wouldn't be a hard sell for me to find cottonwoods growing out here. Willows, some of the Salix goodingi.
And Josh, there was the question about removing the fronds that you have.
Yes, your expertise.
So in my expertise, it's twofold. With people here all the time, I would recommend removing them. It's an errant cigarette. It's an ember from a fire, and they will go. And from that standpoint, will it affect the springs? No. Will it affect the palms? No. But it will be a direct hazard to the people that are here at the time it happens. But that's just, the palms will laugh it off. It's the other vegetation that may have problems with that.
Is the Park Service aware that we have been removing some of the fronds?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And also that there hasn't been an explosive fire here today.
Well, there have.
We had the lightning strike at the upper frond that hit that one, and it came back just fine.
The palms are adapted to fire.
I have a question for the restoration specialist. In the event of another flash flood, and where the Park Service says they'll not come in and do any excavation or restoration of what we culturally have here. This is completely filled with rubble in the past, and we've taken all out. And will we be able to restore a flash flood in
Self-restore.
the event, in the future?
Self-restore, not Park Service restore, but self-restore.
Will we be able to clean out a flash flood if it happens?
Yeah, are we allowed to go ahead and clean shit up?
Or is it natural deposition and leave it be?
I'll admit that's a part of the plan I don't fully understand. And it's really brief. It says that if there's a flash flood, things will not be repaired.
Is that by you or by the user group?
It doesn't say. So that would be something to comment on and help us be more specific, because I didn't help write the plan. I've only been involved in the past year, and when I read that, I wondered kind of the same thing that you're wondering.
Yeah, I
So,
think I thought
ask
was
that
that the
question.
tubs would not be rebuilt or,
By the
so
Park Service.
anything
But they could-
destroyed would not be reconstructed.
By
By
anybody?
But we could empty them out.
Yeah.
Under maintenance.
Oh, yeah,
not-
I mean, yeah.
If they're
Maintenance
filled in,
goes on.
absolutely, you can empty them out. What it is
Probably-
it's a statement of findings, and so anytime you're in a floodplain, which this is a giant wash here, that is one of the regulatory pieces that we have to go through with all of our plans, is this statement of findings, and we delineate the floodplain and we look at hazards, and so one of the things we have to say is, like, where do people go if there's a flash flood? What happens? And it is often done by people that are outside of the park. They look at the information we feed them, which is topography, the hydrographic basin, and then they come back and look at everything with modeling efforts and then say, you know, these are their recommendations. If something's filled in, I don't see why, because we are also proposing to do cooperative agreements with folks like RAF and SPA and others that might want to join in, that if it's just filled in with rubble, there's reason to think that that could be a future endeavor.
And those are sorts of things that could be spelled out more specifically when the plan is finalized. So please ask those questions.
That'll be
And
500
suggest
pages.
what's gonna
Along
happen.
the same line of flash flooding, is there any way there are a few modifications in the wash up here that could happen outside of the wilderness area, which would divert this flow from coming here, as well as up at the upper springs. There's a little modification to happen there that would keep that road from washing out. That would send it down through this area with not a whole lot of excavation. But, you know, does the park have any proclivity towards preventing the resource here from being impacted by natural flow patterns?
So I have a couple thoughts on that. One is that's a great comment to put in, but two is it sort of depends on, we go all the way back to the very first question. So I think it was you that asked me, is this a developed area or not? What does the park consider this? So we do burns and flood protection in developed areas like Scotty's Castle, Furnace Creek, and Texas Springs to protect those campgrounds from being impacted by floods. If this is a natural backcountry area that has some inadvertent use, you wouldn't protect a natural spring from a flood because that's a naturally occurring thing. But if it's a developed area with camping and people using it, which it probably leans towards that, then you would want to maybe do some flood protection and things like that.
Under the cultural historic status of this place,
sites.
could we perhaps get an agreement to do it ourselves or get some parks to do? Because there's a marvelous wall that was created that is now one flood from being gone. Have you seen that, Mike?
Is that going up towards the upper spring?
That's in the wash back up in here.
Yeah.
I'd love to show it to you.
Yeah, we can go look at that.
It's a monumental effort by the community.
Right. I think that's a great comment to put in, because flood protection is sort of a question. It sort of begs the question of, you know, how developed of an area is this? Is this a developed area that people congregate at? Or is this a remote backcountry site like Eureka Valley, which is sort of in between, or is it a really remote backcountry site that just, where, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and how much flood protection do you put? Normally for an ARC site, you wouldn't.
Right. But for cultural historic area, which we've been doing this for a while, you know.
Right.
And so we do have that status.
Right.
Not quite on the books yet, but I would hope that we could protect them.
I would think so.
Which brings up the question, does the park consider this an asset or a liability?
It's an asset, man.
Well,
absolutely. This is one of the coolest spots in the park, man. I don't know. I mean, but if that's your comment,
So there's some worth here to preserve.
well, heck yeah.
Which brings up a question about the invasive animals around here. Would it be more cost effective to remove them or build a 40-acre fence around it? You know how costly projects are. How many wild burros are there in this valley? 4,000. 4,000?
Is it entire park?
In Death Valley National Park, between 2,000 and 4,000.
What about this valley here?
We don't have a clear count on them here in this valley just yet, but they are here. They are expanding. They're coming up out of Darwin Falls area. In fact, Monday night, Patrick and I were coming back from Bishop and saw one in the middle of the road at about 11:30 at night on Town Pass. Not Father Crowley Town Pass. They are coming north through the Panamints. They're into the Hunter Mountain Range and up there at Leaf Flat area, and you will start to see them continue to come this way. There are herds here. They're pretty large in number, but the valley's really big, and there's not a lot of accessible areas. So we haven't had the ability to go get a good count on them. The last real count we had in the park is in 2005. So for decades leading up to that, we had been doing removals in the park, and there was an estimated 200 to 400 animals at that time. They're a classic invasive species. They come from North Africa. They have no disease, no predators. Their populations grow at somewhere between 20 and 25% a year. That means every 4 to 5 years, they're doubling their herd sizes. Some people ask me all the time, will the burrows go away? They're never going to go away if you look on the landscape. The BLM is mandated to have herd management areas and keep them at acceptable management levels. So they do have thresholds. When they cross that threshold, they have to then relocate them. And they do that through adoption. We just entered into an agreement with a group out of Texas. It's a donkey rescue to help as a piece of that, and then domesticate them and adopt them out as well. But it's a landscape scale problem, and the numbers are staggering.
So they will capture and take those away at no cost to the taxpayers?
So what I am telling people is it's a minimal cost, because we still have the obligations to make sure we're doing basically the Hippocratic Oath. We're doing NEPA, NHPA, wilderness, all of the laws that govern what we do. We still have to do that. That requires us to do it. We can't give that to anybody else. So there is some minimal cost to us, but yes, they are doing that on their own time.
Did we ask that you take burros from here first? Put us on your priority list?
Within a 10-mile circle.
They're the easy to catch ones.
Yeah, it would be a win.
So we've got
Hey, people, be recognized.
So I think we've got a couple more questions, and then we've already taken up an hour of your guys' time. So what I might offer is that we answer these questions, and then we just come talk with you and help answer any additional questions, if that's all right.
That puts a lot of
You
pressure
have
on
an
these last
advantage
people.
that the BLM
Well, and I've got a few
doesn't
myself.
have, in that you are exempt from the Wild Horse and Burro Act. Back in the 70s, the Furnace Creek Ranger used to pick a road patrolman, hand him a 30-06, and tell him to go deal with that burro problem. It's a whole lot quicker and easier. And if protected rangers driving around anyway, just stop and shoot them. And, you know, it's good for coyotes, it's good for badgers, it's good for ravens. It's organic material.
They're pretty invasive here. Can we do that?
Do you think there's any controversy with that? Not in California. Well, I would.
You're you know, shoot the damn thing.
Two quick things on that. One is I would encourage you to submit that comment back.
I shot 2 of them.
The second thing is, actually, if you look at our borough management plan from about a decade ago, it has a series of steps. Because we're shackled by the Wild Horse and Burro Management Plan, or whatever the Act, Free Range Act. The final step, if we're not able to round them all up, we can graduate to direct reduction.
Why waste the money?
But
You know,
that's
because it's
because we
controversial
would
doesn't
much
mean it's
rather
wrong.
find a way to move them to places where they can be protected and live their lives out or be adopted and not just
Yeah,
be
but
left
they are
with-
part of the history in here since the early 1800s with the minings.
Right.
You know, so I disagree to remove them all. I agree to keep some. It's like a balance. It's an eco balance.
And
It's
now
like
you
the,
see
the
the
existence with the
controversy.
monster.
Birth control.
That's all.
Eat them and feed them.
Yeah, I was, go for it.
Okay, well, I want to shift gears slightly and talk a little bit more about the fencing. The fencing that's decorative or artistic, whatever you're talking about, what's going to be the access through that fencing for vehicles in, and let's say hikers at the springs to go out? You know, I mean, you're basically kind of fencing us in. I want to know what it's going to look like, or answer some of those answers.
Do you know where the man gate is up at the upper spring, where you angle through the one that burros supposedly can't get through?
I do.
So
Yes.
there would be things like that where it makes sense to get out in and out of the fence, and then for the road it would be
Cattle guard.
I'd like to point out that at Waukesha, where they put the fence up, the ecological area, if you go over in there, it is completely loaded with burro shit.
Same with the upper
Completely.
They find a way. Like they find a way.
They're pretty crafty suckers.
Yeah, it seems like a waste of money to build a big fence that the birds are going to get through anyway.
How about just putting up some posts that say no camping beyond this point, and on the other side, no burros beyond this point?
If that worked, that would be fantastic.
Have them sign a contract.
Well, I got another one. I'm kind of curious about the 200-foot setback. We're not contaminating the water. It's an above-ground source. So where's the precedent? Where's that 200-foot thing coming from? We're strongly, I think, speak for all of us, we don't want that. We want 100 feet and honor it. So where's that coming from?
So I reveal the big secret that we screwed up. It's 100 foot total.
Awesome.
I just want to point out that when you guys are 3 feet away from each other, we can't hear Mike Ramsey's question, and we can't hear yours.
Okay, so Ramsey's question was about the 200-foot setback versus 100-foot setback water source. And what I told him was that we actually made a mistake in the plan. We had analyzed it and made it 100 feet, but printed it as 200 feet. So it will get corrected in the final document. But I would suggest you submit that in the comments, say 100 feet. But we heard that before and just made a mistake in what was printed.
Camping near the dog pool up here, which is not only irrigation, but it's also a fire suppression, that water is tested. Right over on the dig it out, the bird comes right there. That's the fourth source here from other
Those specific details, because you know the area so well, please write them in the comments, because that's going to be the more specific stuff is stuff we need to capture for the long-term management. So talking to us, it's great to hear that, but please make sure those kind of specific things are in a written comment so we don't lose them.
Your question had to do with arc sites in a floodplain? And the value of that? Well, so for 3.4 million acres, Death Valley, we know about 6% of the entire park for our archaeological surveys. We have some here that date back to the 30s. There was a Baldwin expedition, it was called, here into the Saline Valley. What I do know is that we did try to relocate those sites in 2012, about the same time we went to public scoping. It might have been 11 or 10, but it was in conjunction with going to public scoping to look at the valley as a whole and what still remains. Large chunks of those sites are now missing. Whether it's because of perturbations from flooding is unknown. Whether it's from increased use out here is unknown. Whether they just couldn't find them. What we do know is we couldn't find about half of what was here in the 30s. But does it give it a less value? Under the laws that govern what we do with archaeological stuff, there's about 50 of them. And so we don't necessarily discern between ones that are at risk and ones that aren't. We treat them all the same. So we have to do our due diligence on any sort of effort that we take to go look and make sure that we're not doing more harm. Like if there's a site, how do we recover, do data recovery on it and record what was there, or avoid it or minimize it.
Right here, if it was in our camp area. It would protect that particular site in situ, right where it is, leave it there. But you would allow a campsite to be on top of it, or things like that.
So there is a process for it. So what we can do is data recovery is what they call it, because once it's taken out of situ, it loses its contextual value.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that the campsite can't go there. It just means there's a long process that we have to go through. We have to consult with the SHPO, with the State Historic Preservation Office. We also have to record that data. They get sent into the information centers. So the way states deal with NHPA, their National Historic Preservation Act, is all states set up historic preservation centers. In California, there's about 14 or 15 different information centers that the information goes to. From here, we deal with about 3 of them. And that is, if you're a professional archaeologist, you're doing surveys in the other area, you can see what's available to you.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it can't happen. What it means is that we have a process we have to go through and decide whether that campsite is more valuable at that point in time than the ARC site left in situ. I hope that answers your question.
All right. I know you can't be specific.
Can we shift gears just a tiny bit?
We need one more question over here.
Okay.
Is everybody okay if we continue with the Q&A?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a kind of a quick, easy one, and then one. The first one is regarding the Bermuda grass. I don't have the historical background that a lot of guys have. I guess I would just ask the question, if there's talk about replacing the Bermuda grass with some other type of grass, as you mentioned, it's very difficult to remove Bermuda grass. You're never going to get all the roots. The work and the mess that's going to make, around here, for the game, if you look outside the fence, where's the grass? It hasn't spread out there because there's no water for it. So, I think that's something that 60 years has shown it probably doesn't need to be done because it hasn't spread anywhere other than where there's water. I just want to say that. But the other thing is regarding ethnography. I noticed and no one's commented on this yet in the summary, that there's talk about the agreement or the new legal thing with the tribe. And there's very little said about that, and I understand that's a separate process that's going on apart from this, but in a lot of ways, the verbiage in this document is concerning because it's very direct and absolute. It says the springs will be managed in accordance with the agreement made. And we know nothing about this agreement. We don't know, is it going to say the tribe has ancestral rights, and so therefore they can do whatever they want? Is it going to be anything in between? That's of critical importance because ethnography doesn't just respect things that happened hundreds of years ago. As you all acknowledge, and thank you for acknowledging the ethnographic value of this place to this group that's here. This is an ethnic group that you see in front of you right now. And you may not think of it that way because it's not something you're reading about in the history books yet, but you will. This is an ethnicity that you see in front of you in its own respect, and I think it's very important that the impact of whatever this agreement is with the tribe is vetted through a similar process as this, because these statements, as absolute as they are, kind of leave the sky open to anything. Fact is, the tribe hasn't been here in decades, if not more. And to make a claim, I have nothing against any ethnicity in the world, but fact is tribes are very good at monetizing things. They do it, I mean, and probably anyone here can acknowledge, I'm from Alaska, and it's all over up there. They're just very good at it. They get rights to things through legal agreements like this, and they monetize them. So, again, I don't want to sound bigoted or anything like that. It's just something that we need to be very cautious of when we're trying to make an agreement with a tribe that we have never seen the words of. Yeah, that's
very good point.
Yes.
Very good.
So there's several things associated with that. One is with the Timbisha-Shoshone Homeland Act of 2000, we're mandated to have an agreement with them by Congress. We have not yet created that agreement, much like it took us 24 years to get where we are with Saline Valley. We don't have an agreement with the tribe yet on what co-management looks like. This is the traditional homeland of the Timbisha-Shoshone, and the U.S. Congress has said all of Death Valley National Park has sacred areas where we will consult with them to make sure we're being true to what the spirit and intent was from the tribe. Doesn't mean, I mean, in the end, we talked about what the National Park Service does. There are multiple users. When you talk about everyone, one of the biggest challenges, including with this plan, I think even highlighted by what you said, you haven't seen the tribe here in decades. Why do you think that is?
Excuse me, why they don't have any representative today, for example?
Yeah, is anybody here from the tribe?
Right here.
Okay, good. I want to know, yeah.
So my point would be, though, that when you have one type of use at a site, you can only use one site at one time for one person. So if you're the ones using it in a certain way, it can displace other people that would perhaps use it. If a regular visitor with a group of family members wanted to camp here, but for example, nudity were something that they weren't comfortable with, they're not able to use this site. They're displaced from it. If the tribe wanted to use this site in an ethnographic traditional way, they're no longer able to do that because now there's palm trees and grass and other people using it. And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I'm saying that is real, and this is public land that belongs to everybody in the country, not any single ethnographic use, not the tribe, not the Park Service, not you guys, not anybody. It's everybody's. And so our job is to make sure that to the extent possible, we make that available to people and make people comfortable going there, make it accessible for people, not to force people to go there or force them to use it in a certain way. Like that's not it. It's also, but making sure that people aren't excluded from being able to use something because it is public land. It belongs to all of us, and that's part of the job. So, I mean, it speaks a little bit, not directly to what you're saying. We don't have an agreement with the tribe. I don't know what it would look like. It would be a public process, and much like this process, there will be conversations, and I wouldn't, I can't anticipate what would be in it, but it wouldn't necessarily trump another plan that the park has already done. It would be another way that you could look at how places in the park are going to be used. So that's not a direct answer, but...
So, to the direct question you asked, there's two things. The Timbisha-Shoshone are a cooperating agency on this plan. They have commented and will continue to comment through the duration of this year until we come out with a final. And then to the Timbisha-Shoshone Homeland Act that mandates that we have these cooperative agreements, the one specific to Saline Valley says pretty point blank that it will not be a non-exclusive use, so they can't just claim it. That was the congressional verbiage.
So it will be protected.
It will. I don't know what you mean by protected.
In the use that it's being used at.
It says non-exclusive.
It says non-exclusive, so it wouldn't be then
subject to other federal law.
The question, I think the crux of it is, again, with utmost of respect for all ethnicities and cultures, is, and I would ask, and sir, thank you for being here. I'm Dave. It's nice to meet you. I would ask, at the time that this cultural resource grew into its own and became what it is now, was the tribe active here prior to that, immediately prior to that? Were they displaced by that? Was that a part of that process? And if not, I would say to come and make a claim on it now is a little bit over the top. If you weren't present here doing what you...
I can answer that, and if I